All right, let's dive into a really fascinating thought experiment. I'm talking about an ancient legal puzzle that has, believe it or not, tied scholars in knots for centuries. It's this incredible deep dive into language, our intentions, and what can happen in just a single fleeting moment.
And really, the whole thing comes down to this one question. It sounds simple enough, right? But think about it. Can a single statement, said in the exact same breath, mean two totally different, even contradictory, things at the exact same time? It kind of messes with how we think about language. Let's see if we can figure this out.
Okay, so to really get this puzzle, there's one key concept we need to get our heads around. It's from ancient temple law, and it's called a substitute offering, or tamura. Here's how it worked. You could take a regular, non-sacred animal and, just by saying a specific phrase, transfer the sacred status from an already consecrated animal over to it. I mean, the words themselves literally had the power to change reality. Pretty wild, huh? So, with that in mind, let's look at the actual case that started it all. Imagine this. Someone has two sacred animals. One is set aside as a burnt offering, the other as a peace offering. Now, they bring in a third, totally normal animal and try to make it a substitute. And, well, this is exactly where the problem kicks off. And here's the exact vow they make. Pointing to this regular animal, the person says, "This animal is the substitute of the burnt offering, the substitute of the peace offering." Whoa, see the issue? They've just tried to slap two completely different, mutually exclusive secret statuses onto one animal. So, what's the ruling? What actually happens now? Right away, two different solutions pop up. On one side, you've got Rabbi Meir, who argues for a super simple rule. Whatever you said first, that's what sticks. So in this case, the animal becomes a substitute for the burnt offering, and that's it. Case closed. But then, on the other side, Rabbi Yosei says, hold on, we have to think about what the person intended. If they meant to say both, then maybe both should apply. Because, it's physically impossible to say two words at the exact same instant anyway. It's that classic debate, isn't it? The literal words versus the intent behind them. But, of course, the puzzle wasn't solved that easily. Later, scholars looked at this and thought, we can make this even trickier. They basically asked, what if we get rid of the sequence altogether? What if we could make the contradiction truly, absolutely simultaneous? And that brings us to the next evolution of the problem. What's the ruling if someone says, this is the substitute of a burnt offering and a peace offering? See what they did there? By throwing in the word and, they're trying to fuse the two ideas into a single, indivisible thought. This totally sidesteps Rabbi Meir's simple first-come, first-served rule, and man, it sets the stage for a real intellectual showdown. And this is where our two main contenders enter the ring, Abai and Rava. These two were brilliant scholars, and they take on this new, tougher version of the puzzle. Their debate is really the heart of this entire legal exploration. So here's their opening disagreement. Abai argues that because of that word and, the whole statement is now a single unit. It's one idea. So both sanctities have to take effect. But Rava, he doubles down. He says, nope, Rabbi Meir's principle still works here. Even in a single breath, the words burnt offering were mentioned first, so that's the only status that applies. The battle lines are drawn. Now, to try and settle this, Rava does something really clever. He decides to shift the debate from just talking about language to talking about the physical world. He's going to challenge Abai's whole idea of a single unit by bringing up other ritual acts that seem instantaneous and indivisible. And honestly, this is where the debate gets really, really creative. Rava's first challenge is a strong one. He says, okay, Abai, what about ritual slaughter? It's one swift cut, right? A single act. And yet, he points out, the law itself argues about what happens if a person has conflicting intentions during that one cut. Rava's point is, if a single physical act can be divided by intention, then a single spoken phrase can be too. But Abai's comeback here is just masterful. He argues that slaughter isn't really a single moment, it's a process. A knife moves through space and time, right? He says you can have one intention for the first half of the cut, and then a totally different one for the second half. Boom. He just successfully divided the supposedly indivisible act. Okay, but Rava is not giving up. He comes right back with an even better example. He's like, all right, forget the slice. What about scooping a handful of flour from a meal offering? I mean, that's one single scoop, one quick action. How in the world can you divide that? And this is where you can really see Abai's genius at work. He completely sidesteps the action of the scoop itself and looks at the entire ritual. He argues that the conflicting intentions don't happen during the scoop, but in the steps that come after. You have one intention when you're burning the flower, and a second different intention when you're burning the frankincense that goes with it. Again, he finds a way to split the moment into parts.
This right here feels like Rava's checkmate move. He says, aha, gotcha. What about a sinner's meal offering? Because, you see, by law, that specific offering has no frankincense. He's just completely removed the second step that Abai was relying on. Now you've just got one scoop and one burning. It really seems like Rava has finally backed him into a corner with a truly indivisible act.
But Abhayaya has one last and honestly pretty profound argument up his sleeve. He goes completely abstract. He says even if the ritual itself is a single action, the priest's journey to the altar isn't. He could have one intention with his first step and a conflicting intention with his second. His ultimate point is just mind-blowing. Basically that no action is so instantaneous that it can't be logically broken down into smaller pieces of intent.
So, after all that, after this incredible intellectual duel, who won? Who was right, Abaye or Rava? Well, the answer is, it's complicated. The debate left such a lasting legacy precisely because it was never really settled.
So what was the outcome? Well, the argument was so deep, so fundamental that later generations of scholars just taught both sides. You had Rav Shimi bar Ashi, who passed down the law according to Abaye, and then you had Rav Huna bar Natan, who taught it according to Rava. The question just stayed open. And this really tells you everything you need to know about the true purpose of the debate. Maybe finding a single winner was never the point. The real value was in the journey, in the exploration itself. It was like a stress test on the very limits of logic, and a super deep dive into the complex relationship between our words, our actions, and what we really truly intend. And that leaves us with one last thing to chew on. This ancient legal puzzle kind of forces us to ask a very modern and very personal question. I mean, if an action as simple as speaking a sentence, or even just taking a step, can be broken down into a dozen conflicting micro-intentions, how can we ever be truly certain what we, or anyone else for that matter, really means?